For today, like more formally, it's like a pretty big buzzword for a framework for service delivery that is to make sure to take into account when providing a similar service to multiple people that we all are different individuals. We all have big T, little t traumas that have identified and shaped us that cause us to respond differently to different things. Or differently to the same things, rather. For today, the more high-level just kind of aspect I want you to kind of put your hat on when we're going through this is just the practice of consistently seeking to understand those around us. And so a lot of what I'm about to share is coming from a book that I really adore by Dr. Bruce Perry. He's a child psychologist. It's called What Happened to You? And it's really goes into all of the brain science behind a lot of different things. I won't get into all of it, but a lot of it is creating this framework that shifts from what's wrong with, like, why would you be acting, like, I don't know, instead of moving then towards what's happened to you or what's happened in this room or in this situation that's gotten this person to respond in a way that doesn't make sense to me. And so again, just taking that idea of consistently seeking to understand those around us, what's happening around us, the things that we may not be aware of or have experienced ourselves. This is the active view of reading. It's the most recent model for like just fully encompassing all of the different aspects that it takes to then on this right-hand side be reading. The biggest update came with this active self-regulation piece, and so we'll get into it, but really just on the upfront, what that looks like is understanding that if we are not comfortable in our bodies, in our surroundings, if we are hungry, if we're cold, if we're feeling stressed, if we're feeling anything, a lot of you are students, you know what it takes for you to be ready to grind and do what you need to do that's in front of you, and if you are not in that mindset, it's not really worth it, and so, or worth trying, because it's not going to be successful to retaining the information or the new skill and different aspects of that. And so we're going to get through all the literacy activities, just these different word recognition, language comprehension, and the bridging process between those. But this part, we want to talk about some of that regulation component. And so what happens when we feel dysregulated? You don't need to know all of these terms or graphs and different things. I'm throwing a lot at you. Just whatever resonates, take it. Whatever doesn't, you can leave it on the table. First I'll highlight this corner. This is what's called kind of your window of optimal arousal. Again, that's when you're in your focus mind. So you can see there's the hypo and hyper arousal where you're way too sleepy or way too worked up to really focus on anything. And so the goal is that when you're meeting with your students, ideally to challenge them and work on literacy goals, they would need to be in that mindset where they're like, I'm ready to go. Let's try something new. Let's work on something together. But that's not always the case. And so talking about that, we will be talking about that. This is a very simplified, extremely simplified version of what's happening at brain functions on different layers of your brains. This comes from Dr. Bruce Perry's website. I had to include it. It said literacy, and that is the highest level of thinking as a lot of things, which comes with empathy, being able to understand your surroundings and your own feelings, but as well as literacy and working on those goals. So when someone's dysregulated, which we've all felt, this is not something that is entirely related to children. This is something human-wide. We all have these feelings. As older adults, we have much more experience understanding how to process our emotions and work through them productively. Not all children are learning that. It's a learning process. We're still learning it. But when someone is dysregulated, they cannot use the smartest part of their brain. And so I like to paint the picture in a way of when you're in the grocery store maybe and you see a child kind of melting down, just crumbling, and maybe a caregiver says, if you don't stop crying or you don't X, then you don't get ice cream later or you don't get to go to the park later. The reason that doesn't work and the child doesn't just go like, oh, okay, like I do want ice cream later, so I will stop acting now, so I get that thing late. That's a great point. The reason that doesn't work is because you don't have the ability to reach that high-level reasoning thinking when you're feeling those big feelings, which in our context, I'm sure you've all had kind of that clarity feeling when you're feeling more in your window of arousal that you're like, I was being a little irrational, or I wasn't seeing things in the way that they are without my emotions. And so this is kind of just a diagram across the board of what it looks like to be regulated, how much access you have to that high-level thinking, and the more dysregulated you feel, how much that narrows, and really just emphasizing that that's kind of your fight or flight, I said the same word twice, where you're just like, I'm not feeling this, I can't be challenged, I just need some space. So fear shuts down part of the cortex, so that high-level thinking brain. And the way we see that and why it's relevant to this training is that what may be a moderate, developmentally appropriate challenge for one of your second or third graders may cause them to have an overwhelming response because they may have what's called a sensitized stress response. Really, that's just saying, I've experienced one thing in this way and it made me feel this, so when I experience it over here, even though the same stressors may not be there, I may feel similarly towards it. So thinking about this in the realms of a lot of these kids were learning to read during COVID from their homes with their many siblings. I also had to do school online. It was not a conducive learning environment, and I already have a lot of the baseline foundational skills it takes to learn in other ways, and they were learning the foundation that you need to learn. And so some of that sensitized stress response may or may not come from the feelings they have towards reading that developed during a global pandemic. And so just understanding that when you're reading with a student, if their frustration level or they reach frustration quicker than you may have guessed for them, there's probably more to it and just their reading journeys. An example of this with Tomato Fest, actually, or Runaway Tomato, is that we had a mentor that she shared with me, her student, whenever she read the word tomato, just was like really weird about it, would always just guess a different T word. And whenever they'd try to sound out the word tomato, like she just was like not open to trying. And there's no need to get to the bottom of where that came from, but at some point I would journey to guess. She'd try to read this word, felt shut down, and like she couldn't do it. And so now in a different area where she's sounding out a lot of different words and trying a lot of new, different, challenging aspects to her, this one for some reason is just not worth trying. Let's keep moving. And so that's just an example of what this could look like. But how could you support and alleviate some of the stress that your student is feeling if in a situation similar? Regulation. So being connected is the most efficient and effective way to get any sort of information up to the cortex. So you think about the people in your support network, that when you're feeling big feelings, you have your friend that you know you can rely on, and they're telling you probably a lot of the same things that you already know are true, but when they say it, it resonates, even though you're thinking the same thing yourself, it can't ring true. A tutor, a coach, a mentor, again, this is from the book, didn't put in a mentor, therapist, all depend on that relationship to be the superhighway to the cortex. Calling back to earlier when we talked about that mentor, or the targeted mentoring approach, thinking about how in a primarily tutoring section of this, the relationship component may not be as strong, and so when you're feeling challenged in that way, it may cause a shutdown that feels irrevocable, but within this mentoring space, you can rely on this relationship to then challenge and support and speak encouragement to your student. Some more last little pull-out quote I'll take from this book. It's very intuitive, but the more positive time you spend with someone, the more your brain categorizes that person as safe and familiar, and that's what it takes to have that relationship where you're able to hear support. The more you get to know your mentee, the more you'll learn about what challenges them. So this specific student had trouble with that area, but may have been great at comprehension. So if we need to build confidence that day because they're just not feeling like being challenged, then you can do a comprehension activity, or vice versa, knowing what your student loves and is really good at, and then getting to know what they need to be like in the mood for when trying harder things. So what to do, like physically what to do when your student may be feeling these bigger feelings and not having the ability to concentrate. These are a lot of physical aspects of when a lot of regulatory activities are rhythmic, so repeat things. That's why like running or yoga, just different physical things that you're repeatedly doing with your body helps calm your body down. So these are different opportunities or ideas that you could do in the school setting. We have like little squishy stress balls in the cabinet and a bunch of fidget toys, like use one of those. You can roll it back and forth to each other, or even just, we promote fidget toys always. If you just want to have a fidget toy on deck that like helps nervous energy or just fidgety energy. Coloring or doodling side by side. We also have a lot of coloring things and blank paper. Just kind of, it is okay if the focus is not literacy that day, if they need a cool down or whatever that looks like, just following that lead. Like taking walks, so you can say, let's go get some water. Let's walk to the water fountain, or this is where I want to emphasize again that going back to their classroom does not need to be punitive, and it doesn't necessarily need to reflect negatively on you. It doesn't mean if they do ask to go back to their classroom, which I've only observed this once, I don't think it's common, but if they do, it's not anything negative to how they're experiencing you as their mentor. Their classroom is their very predictable environment with all of their friends and their like that is just that is their hub. And so if they're having big feelings and would like to go back there, I want to emphasize for you not to feel that negatively. Deep breathing. So it's kind of funny to get kids to be like, okay, let's like slow our breathing, but there's a lot of different ways that even mentors have shared that they've been able to utilize. One of them is dragon. I can't even actually remember what dragon breath was, but I think it was just to pretend like you're a dragon fire breathing. But one of the ones that I've heard a lot of that's worked is imagining a dandelion, like you're wanting to blow all of the leaves off of the dandelion, or blowing off a slice of pizza before you eat it. Just different things that can calm your breathing, and really just takes the focus off of emotions and more of just the physical space of like, okay, now we're focusing on this, and I'm reacclimating. I have been lucky to be able to mentor students myself in the program. One of my students really liked there's the tile flooring, and so to walk on one of the cracks to pretend it's a balance beam was like a helpful activity for her when she was having a lot of fidgety, nervous energy. So again, this is a list of some things. By no means is it exhaustive. You'll know what creatively you can use to support your student, and that's like an array of things, right? I think I don't want to project that there's these huge big feelings that no one can harness or understand. It can even just be in small things of they're excited to see you, and now how do we settle into our seats together? So just keeping some of these in mind. This is a little graphic that is in your little mentor portal. You don't need to reference it or anything, but just kind of understanding what those regulation zones are and what it looks like for all of us. Just a little tool. Okay, so this is the sheet that you will do during your first visit with your student. And so you guys will each get one. You get to do it together. It is an introductory activity. We just want the first visit to be entirely focused on building that rapport and setting the scene of, I am an adult that will be coming here on Tuesdays at 8 a.m. and I will come every week unless you're not in school, and I will be here until the end of the school year when you go for summer, and then I won't get to see you. Just setting the scene and expectations for the students and getting to know each other. There's some silly questions that we found that just building on some of those more like high-level facts about each other, but getting to see what you have in common is really helpful. So let me see what time it is actually. Okay, I think what we're gonna do actually is there is this little worksheet in your binder, or folder, I'm sorry, in the back of it. Let's take a couple minutes and talk to your partner or like someone in your group, and we'll do these sheets together, do them, and then we'll come back and kind of present some fun facts we've learned about our neighbor.